And good evening. We'll get to the latest on the fallout after President Biden pardoned his son Hunter. But first, we want to start with that breaking news. A dangerous snowstorm slamming the Great Lakes region, leading to a massive highway pileup. Take a look. Video showing the aftermath. Tractor trailers jackknifed and more than a dozen cars crashing into one another. Several cars sliding right off the road. We're told several drivers were injured. Interstate 94 shut down for several hours due to the treacherous road conditions. The historic storm stretching from Ohio to Buffalo, pummeling neighborhoods, hitting areas like Erie, Pennsylvania, especially hard with at least 2 feet of snow. This all happening just as people were making their way home from the Thanksgiving holiday. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin starts us off tonight.
Tonight, the relentless wintry blast wreaking havoc, with icy conditions causing this pileup, shutting down a section of the interstate in Michigan. One driver now in critical condition, according to Michigan State Police, while millions dig their way out of a shocking amount of snow.
This one has been the worst one that I've dealt with for as long as I can remember.
From Michigan to Buffalo, New York. And in Erie, Pennsylvania, the snow caught everyone by surprise, initially overwhelming the county's robust snowplow system, causing rooftops to buckle and trapping thousands in their homes for days, according to county officials.
I just could not open that door, so I put all my weight into it, and I was like, okay, this is what we're rolling with.
Kimberly Stoller was stuck for 3 days, forced to rely on Thanksgiving leftovers for food.
You panicked just a little?
Maybe a tad, because I was like, okay, hold on. This is actually getting to a rather serious point.
This kind of storm can be lethal. A fact that weighs heavily on Erie County Executive Brenton Davis, who today personally responded to a call of an elderly man trapped in his home and relying on oxygen.
What were you going to do if they didn't come help you?
See in the spring.
Davis says on a good day, his county ambulance services are stretched.
You might wait 30 minutes on a sunny day. You add this, it could be hours.
It could be deadly.
It's 100% deadly. It costs people lives every time.
Hard to believe just 2 weeks ago, first responders were focused on this. Unprecedented brush fires in Pennsylvania, fire and ice no one here thought possible, with winter still weeks away.
All right, and with that, Aaron McLaughlin joins Top Story Live tonight from the northwest part of PA in Erie, Pennsylvania. So, Aaron, I know it's been snowing there nonstop. It's still snowing tonight. What more can you tell us about that pileup we saw at the beginning of your report?
Yeah, that pileup happened over in Michigan, Tom. About 17 vehicles, according to police, in total, 14 cars, 3 semi-trucks. And according to authorities, it was a result of the weather conditions, but also weather conditions meaning people simply driving too fast. And that kind of pileup actually is not unique to Michigan. During this storm, on my way here to Erie, Pennsylvania, I actually witnessed a semi-truck spin out on the roads, which is why authorities are urging people to stay off the roads during this weather if possible. If you need to drive, they're saying go slow. Tom.
All right, Aaron McLaughlin leading us off tonight. Aaron, we appreciate that. For more on the forecast, NBC News meteorologist Bill Cairns joins us now live in studio. Let's walk over here to the Weather Center. So, Bill, walk us through how much longer are the people in the Great Lakes area going to feel this winter?
Yeah, we get a little bit of a break tomorrow. We have more snow tonight, and what we're dealing with is snow squalls. Now, the highest total I've seen coming off of Lake Ontario is 65 inches. That's near Watertown, Fort Drum area, someplace called the Tug Hill Plateau. The highest total I've seen in the Buffalo South towns, the snow towns they call them, was 54 inches of snow. So we have some very hefty totals. A lot of the big cities did not get as much, but we still have these squalls going on, and these create very low visibility in a heartbeat. That's why we get these accidents, because you're driving at 60, 65 on the highway, everything's fine. You go through a snow squall, there's an inch or two on the roads, and that's when we get these pileups. Here's Interstate 94, and here's one of those snow squalls going down here in between Benton and Kalamazoo. So this is what we'll worry about through the overnight. And then tomorrow we get a little bit of a break, and then here comes a little clipper system, Tom. This is going to produce some snow through the Great Lakes once again, heavy lake effect, and even some snow in the Northeast Wednesday night.
No break for all those Americans there. Okay, Bill, we appreciate that. We do want to get back to our other major headline tonight, the blowback in Washington after President Biden issued that pardon for his son Hunter. The move drawing widespread condemnation from Democrats and Republicans alike, especially after the president and the White House repeatedly insisted that he would not grant clemency to his son.
Have you ruled out a pardon for your son? Yes.
Is there any possibility that the president would end up pardoning his son?
No. Will he pardon his son? No.
His son, Hunter, is also up for being sentenced next month. Does the president have any intention of pardoning him?
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
President Biden reversing course, issuing that surprise pardon last night, saying, quote, you see it here, I believe in the justice system, but as I wrestled with this, I also believe raw politics has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice. Critics arguing Biden's language undermines his own DOJ and further supports President-elect Trump's argument that the Justice Department is politicized. This is new today. The special counsel in Hunter Biden's tax case calling President Biden's allegations, quote, baseless and citing a dozen judges who already rejected those, quote, selective prosecution claims. And here's a reminder of what Hunter Biden was facing. 12 total counts between his tax and gun charges, which carried a maximum prison sentence of 42 years. Hunter Biden pleaded guilty to 9 federal tax charges and was convicted of 3 felony charges linked to a gun purchase back in 2018. President Biden sparing his son just over a week before he was set to be convicted and sentenced for his federal gun conviction and 2 weeks before his sentencing in his federal tax evasion case. And don't forget that stunning plea deal that completely fell apart last year. The agreement would have allowed Biden to plead guilty to a misdemeanor tax charge and dismiss all gun charges against him. But a judge questioned the package, prompting Hunter's legal team to reject it. President Biden's decision facing bipartisan backlash. Jared Polis, the Democratic governor of Colorado, saying, while as a father, I understand President Biden's natural desire to help his son by pardoning him, I'm disappointed that he put his family ahead of the country. This is a bad precedent that could be abused by later presidents. Democratic Congressman Greg Statton from Arizona saying, I respect President Biden, but I think he got this one wrong. Republican Senator James Langford writing, quote, so Oklahomans are now supposed to believe DOJ is unbiased and non-political when they go after Trump or Republicans, but they're biased when they go after the Biden family. Senior White House correspondent Kelly O'Donnell has more on this firestorm from Washington.
After wielding presidential power to protect his son, Hunter Biden, from a potential prison sentence with a full and unconditional pardon. Tonight, President Biden is facing sharp criticism from Democrats and Republicans, even as some express sympathy for Joe Biden, the father.
If it was my son, I'd pardon him too. But here's what I didn't like. Don't lie to us. Don't tell us you're not going to do it and then do it.
Arizona Congressman, Democrat Greg Stanton.
I'm pretty angry because it's going to be incredibly important that political leaders of both parties stand up for the independence of the Department of Justice.
President Biden and White House officials repeatedly insisted there would be no pardon.
I said I abide by the jury decision. I will do that, and I will not pardon him.
We've been asked that question multiple times. Our answer stands, which is no.
Tonight, on a 3-day visit to Africa, the president did not respond to reporters' questions.
Mr. President, will you answer a few questions?
But at a White House Christmas event, First Lady Jill Biden expressed her support for the pardon. The pardon was first reported by NBC News Sunday night, and shortly thereafter, President Biden explained his grant of clemency in a statement. The president asserted, I have watched my son being selectively and unfairly prosecuted. The pardon is sweeping, covering not only his son's felony convictions on firearms charges and tax evasion, where he faced potential prison time at sentencing this month. But the president provided more than a decade of blanket protection, preventing further federal prosecution for any offenses dating back to January 2014, months before the younger Biden joined the board of a Ukrainian energy company while his father was vice president. Blaming a heated environment, the president argued that raw politics has infected this process. He invoked his son's recovery from addiction. There's been an effort to break Hunter, who has been 5.5 years sober, and claimed his political adversaries could pose future risk to his family, writing, in trying to break Hunter, they've tried to break me, and there's no reason to believe it will stop here. Enough is enough.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell joins us tonight from the White House. So, Kelly, you mentioned this in your report. I want to walk our viewers through this. Do we know why the pardon goes as far back as 2014 to cover offenses, quote, which Hunter has committed or may have committed or taken part in? 2014 is that year Hunter joined the board of Burisma, the Ukrainian gas company that hired Hunter, though he had little to no experience in the sector or in Ukraine, but his father was vice president. So, Kelly, do we know why the time span on this pardon is so broad?
It wasn't explicitly stated in the president's remarks, but what we know is that the investigations that have looked at Hunter Biden and his conduct go back to that period when he was on the board of Burisma. Questions about whether there were any improper activities at that time. There have been no charges to that effect, but by doing this, the president allows that the time in which Hunter Biden might be vulnerable to a future committee on Capitol Hill or future prosecutors looking at that period of time when his father was in office as vice president and then subsequently the other charges where he does have convictions, it just gives him that broad protection. So if he's going to use a pardon, he's using it for the broadest possible time frame, also including things like statute of limitations and so forth. But again, the president doesn't explicitly explain that. We have to infer it. Tom?
Kelly O'Donnell walking us through a very major moment at the White House there. For more on this historic presidential pardon, I want to bring in NBC News legal analyst and friend of Top Story, Danny Savalos. So, Danny, say Hunter Biden stays a Boy Scout, he stays sober, gets in no more trouble. Are his legal troubles over, or can Republicans still go after him?
Yes, mostly, but not forever. For example, a pardon can't pardon future crimes, so he's not off the hook forever and ever after Biden gets out of office. And also, Republicans can go after him in Congress. They can hold hearings, they can haul him in. None of that is covered by the pardon power. The pardon power can only control within the branch that it exists, and that is the executive branch. It does not exist in the judiciary or in the legislative branch, which is where they can haul him in if...
But they can't go back and look into Burisma, his time in Burisma, and say, hey, if they do find any crimes there, they haven't yet so far, but if they do, they can't go after him during that time.
You mentioned crimes. So crimes would be DOJ, and the answer to that would be no. But in terms of a legislative investigation, can they ask him about it?
Yeah.
Do you get into a thorny area about the Fifth Amendment, privilege against self-incrimination? If there's no possibility he could incriminate himself now, that might be an issue as well in a legislative investigation.
Here's a portion of the president's statement. I want to put it up for our viewers here. I want to read it to you to get your take on this, because some of this is what's gotten President Biden in trouble today. The charges in his cases, this is from the president, came only after several of my political opponents in Congress instigated them to attack me and oppose my election, that a carefully negotiated plea deal agreed to by the Department of Justice unraveled in the courtroom, with a number of my political opponents in Congress taking credit for bringing political pressure on the process. Had the plea deal held, it would have been a fair, reasonable resolution of Hunter's cases. But what the president fails to mention here is that it was Hunter's own legal team that backed out of that plea deal, correct?
Exactly right. And Hunter Biden was prepared to plead guilty or take responsibility for these crimes. And essentially what Biden is saying, in what I think is a very ill-advised statement, is that this prosecution on the whole was unjustified, that no reasonable person would have brought this prosecution. I'm paraphrasing. He doesn't exactly say that, but even that is something, in my mind, as a criminal defense attorney, he's essentially casting aspersions on the juries, the grand jury and the petit jury, the one that convicted him. Those were civilians. They weren't part of any government process, and it rings too much like what the right would argue about lawfare and government persecution.
So what does this do to all those U.S. attorneys who worked on this case and the DOJ right now?
Yeah, look, I mean, the essence of a pardon from the beginning has always been a bit of an anomaly. It's a paradox. It's the head of the executive branch essentially undoing a lot of hard work by others in the executive branch, and, of course, all the money and the resources spent prosecuting people. But even more so, to give a statement like this where you're essentially criticizing the same members of the DOJ who work under your command. I mean, to some degree, the special counsel is independent, but that's the deal here. It's the DOJ. It's his DOJ.
Danny Savalos for us. Danny, we appreciate all that. Next tonight, to new questions about President-elect Trump's cabinet nominees. Trump's picks for two key positions, Pete Hegseth as defense secretary and Kash Patel as FBI director, facing scrutiny over their past and uncertainty over the future of their confirmations. NBC's Garrett Hake is following it all from Capitol Hill tonight.
Tonight, Donald Trump's embattled selection for Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on Capitol Hill, following shocking new reports about his personal conduct. Hegseth ignoring questions as he met with Republican senators.
Appreciate the opportunity to talk to senators today. Great process.
A new article from The New Yorker revealing the contents of a previously undisclosed 2015 report written by former employees of a veterans organization Hegseth ran, alleging he was repeatedly intoxicated, quote, to the point of needing to be carried out of the organization's events. The New Yorker reporting he was eventually forced to step down.
So that article suggests you have an alcohol problem.
Okay, thank you guys. All right, thanks, guys. Let's go.
NBC News has not independently verified the report. Hegseth's attorney declined to comment, but in a statement to The New Yorker, an advisor said the claims were, quote, outlandish and came from a petty and jealous, disgruntled former associate. The Trump transition team referred NBC News to a previous statement in support of Hegseth. Meanwhile, the New York Times is reporting Hegseth's mother sent him an email in 2018 during his second divorce, calling him, quote, an abuser of women. Penelope Hegseth writing, quote, I have no respect for any man that belittles, lies, cheats, sleeps around, and uses women for his own power and ego. NBC News has not independently obtained the email, but Mrs. Hegseth told The Times she apologized almost immediately and disavowed her original note.
Pete's the type of guy that he's going to work. He's got great work ethic. He's very, very smart.
And on Saturday, President-elect Trump naming Kash Patel as his choice to take over the FBI. Patel, a fierce Trump ally and an outspoken critic of the Bureau.
I'd shut down the FBI Hoover building on day one and reopening the next day as a museum of the deep state.
Patel would replace Trump appointee Christopher Wray, who is just 7 years into a 10-year term, and would have to be fired or resign to clear the way for Patel, a former public defender, federal prosecutor, and Trump national security official.
He's experienced not only in putting criminals behind bars, but also can understand what happens when government overreaches.
Patel has little management experience and has promoted lies that the 2020 election was stolen.
We will follow the facts and the law and go to courts of law and correct these justices and lawyers who have been prosecuting these cases based on politics.
The combative Trump loyalist is also the author of a children's book, The Plot Against the King, in which a wizard-like Kash defends King Donald.
If you have the power of that office, the FBI directorate, and you're using it to go after political enemies or the press or people you regard as adversaries, that's worse than incompetence. That's abuse of power that you have.
All right, Garrett Haake joins us tonight from Capitol Hill. Garrett, let's break down both these nominees. Let's start with Pete Hegseth first. Are you seeing any real signs that more Republicans are willing to break ranks with President-elect Trump over these new revelations?
Well, Tom, Republican senators are being very careful not to show their cards right now. When Hegseth was first announced, you heard initial skepticism about his background, that he would be fit for this job. Now we've seen several stories which have raised concerns about his character and about his sort of overall fitness to serve in the administration. What I'm hearing from Republican senators on the record right now is that they want to see this process work. But this process is about where we were just about now when Matt Gaetz pulled out a few weeks ago for his confirmation process to become Attorney General. So I'm trying to ascertain if behind the scenes some of the same signals are being sent to the Trump team that this may not be working out. It's just too early to say tonight.
Okay, and then over to Kash Patel now. President-elect Trump is touting his credentials, but what kind of scrutiny do you think he's likely to face when he makes his rounds on the Hill?
He's going to face substantial scrutiny, in part because a lot of Republicans who aren't particularly Trump-aligned think Chris Wray, the current FBI director, who is still in that job, is doing a perfectly acceptable job. So why you would need to replace him with another Republican appointee when he still has 3 years left is a question I think Patel is going to have to answer. That said, most Republican lawmakers have toed the line, at least to some extent, on the idea that, you know, the DOJ and the FBI need some level of reform, need some level of overhaul. So Patel's message on that, I think, will be greeted, if not warmly, at least senators will listen. Whether the time that he's going to spend between now and whenever he ultimately gets a confirmation hearing turns up more about his own personal background, as has been the case with some of these other Trump selections, I think will be the thing that's really determinative on whether or not he gets the votes to be the next FBI director.
All right, Garrett Haake on Capitol Hill for us. Garrett, thank you. For more on the Trump transition and the future of his latest cabinet picks, I want to bring in our panel tonight. Frank Figliuzzi, former FBI agent and NBC News senior national security and intelligence analyst. Hogan Gidley, former Trump White House deputy press secretary, and Andrea Goldstein, a former director of force resiliency for the Department of Navy, who also served on the House Committee of Veteran Affairs and on active duty in the Navy. She continues to serve in the reserves. All right, we thank you all for being here tonight. Frank, you're first up here. As a former FBI agent, what are your greatest concerns about Kash Patel?
You know, ironically, it's not the fact that he's remarkably unqualified for the job, as has already been said, but rather it's his blind allegiance to Donald Trump. He seems to have no other value system than to simply make Trump happy. And that could get us to a situation where a very powerful federal law enforcement agency starts abusing its authority to go after citizens, go after political enemies, members of the media, people who had simply done their job as prosecutors or investigators. That's the troubling part of this. If you combine it with the language that Pam Bondi has used, the nominee for AG, you've got essentially a hijacking of the federal criminal justice system by Trump. We've seen an abusive FBI before under J. Edgar Hoover. History tells us that it's not good when a president and an FBI director go after enemies and unlawfully wiretap and surveil and blackmail people, as happened during the Hoover era, and that's my chief concern.
Hogan, you've worked with Kash Patel. You've just listened to Frank. What's your response?
Also, the FBI was doing that under Joe Biden. We all know the lie they told about the 51 intel agents who signed this letter claiming that the Hunter Biden laptop was actually Russian disinformation. All of that turned out to be not true either. The FBI has a storied history of mistakes, missteps, all types of problems. What Kash Patel is going to do with his background at DOD, also at DNI, not to mention the fact he won an award while serving for the Obama administration as well. So he's worked for both Republicans and Democrats. He's going to shake things up. Two words I'd pay attention to in the Trump administration. Transparency is one of those things, and then accountability is the other. Oftentimes, it takes a long time to get to the fact that we pull the curtain back and you get to see exactly what's going on. The American people are shocked and worried by that, but no one ever gets held to account. Peter Strzok and Lisa Page obviously conspiring to do damage to the Trump administration. They actually ended up getting a cash payment from the government for what they were accused of doing when it was clear they were trying to undermine Donald Trump at every turn. You're going to see a cabinet here that really does go to not just perpetuate and move forward the MAGA movement, but one that works for the American people. And I'm sorry, but it's not new that a president would appoint people to his cabinet that do show some level of allegiance and loyalty to that person. It happens in every administration. This one is no different.
Hogan, I want to get your take on this. The Wall Street Journal had an editorial about Kash Patel, and here's what they wrote over the weekend. It was titled, Kash Patel, the FBI and Retribution. Besides pointing out that he's never worked in the FBI, they also write this. Voters didn't reelect Mr. Trump to practice lawfare the way his opponents have. The country wants a bureau it can trust, not a Republican version of the Comey FBI. Hogan, isn't this essentially exactly what President-elect Trump campaigned against, was bringing politics in the FBI, into these other branches of government? Isn't that what he's essentially doing now?
No, and these things are all going to get adjudicated by, of course, the U.S. Senate. Kash is going to make his rounds, have those conversations. It's going to play out either before in those private meetings with the U.S. Senate, or it's going to play out in public when we actually have those hearings. Kash Patel isn't going to do that. What he is going to do is take that FBI, which has had so many problems over the past several decades, and actually align it with what it's supposed to do, being the top cop, I guess, for the United States of America, and prosecuting those that deserve prosecution. We've seen this from the federal government for a long time, going after people it just disagrees with politically. It happened under Joe Biden. It's not going to happen under Donald Trump.
Frank, real quick, give me an example here, because in that editorial they point out that he was not a former G-man. Give me an example here of a scenario where you think someone with zero experience in the FBI now leading that department, where it becomes a problem.
I think he has no knowledge of the law or the Constitution. He's a half-baked prosecutor who spent a few years in a courtroom, and by all accounts of witnesses who worked with him, doesn't know his way around the courtroom. He's been admonished by a federal judge for unprofessionalism. And so what he's going to do, because just listen, don't listen to me, listen to what he's told us he's going to do. He's going to go after the media. He's going to go after prosecutors and investigators. And it's all premised on this false lie that Hogan is perpetuating tonight, which is that there's some deep deep state and that the Russia inquiry was unfounded, which has been found repeatedly to be properly predicated. Multiple indictments in that Russia special counsel case. McCabe and Strzok were restored in terms of pension. It was found that they were wrongly fired, and all of this is fabricated.
Steve, the FBI knew about the Hunter Biden stuff years before. 51 intel agents signed that letter, and only one of two things can be true. One, they knew that thing was real and they lied about it, or two, they can't spot Russian disinformation at all. They don't have the ability. Either way, it's not good for the American people. I'm not perpetuating a lie.
What does that have to do with the FBI?
The fact is the FBI has failed the American people many times. Everyone understands that.
Gentlemen, I want to get Andrew into this conversation.
Signed that letter.
Yeah, I want to get Andrew into this conversation. Let's talk about Pete Hegseth and segue here. On the topic of President-elect Trump's appointments, there's new reporting about Hegseth that emerged this weekend. I want to read you a portion. This is from the New Yorker detailing Hegseth's past, including one specific instance. It says, quote, a trail of documents corroborated by the accounts of former colleagues indicates that Hegseth was forced to step down by both of the two nonprofit advocacy groups that he ran, Veterans for Freedom and Concerned Veterans for America, in the face of serious allegations of financial mismanagement, sexual impropriety, and personal misconduct. A previously undisclosed whistleblower report on Hegseth's tenure as the president of Concerned Veterans for America from 2013 to 2016 described him as being repeatedly intoxicated while acting in his official capacity to the point of needing to be carried out of the organization's events. Andrea, what do you say to this?
Yes, thank you for having me, Tom. So even before this reporting came out, Hegseth was already incredibly unqualified for the position. He'd never led a large he'd never led a large organization. He had no civilian experience in government. Within the Department of Defense and certainly within the military services, we repeatedly say that leadership sets the tone. And the tone that Hegseth set, particularly at a time when the military is trying to address harmful and destructive behaviors like sexual assault, sexual harassment, hazing, and bullying, this is alarming and continues to highlight that he's not qualified to lead the largest government bureaucracy.
Hogan, what's your sense here? Do you think President-elect Trump has the appetite for a big fight on Capitol Hill over these confirmations? Is Peter Hegseth someone that he's willing to fight for, you think?
Well, listen, Donald Trump has a lot of political capital to spend, and it's going to be up to him to decide how he actually spends it. Obviously, winning all the swing states, winning the popular vote, the guy's got some cash to spend on Capitol Hill. It wasn't going to happen, obviously, for Matt Gaetz. He did the responsible thing because he didn't want to get the administration started on the wrong foot. And Matt Gaetz selflessly said, I'm going to step down from this position. I think right now Donald Trump is absolutely behind Pete Hegseth. It's a strong pick, someone who's actually been in the field, won several accommodations, of course, and awards for his service, in combat. And so it remains to be seen what plays out in front of the Senate. But the fact is, Pete Hegseth is going to enter this fight with all of the bravery he's faced in the past as well, ready to kind of talk about his past and ready to talk about the future, which is what the DOD desperately needs at this time when they're suffering in all kinds of ways.
Andrea, has there been any efforts, maybe it's a grassroots efforts from veterans? You're still on active duty with the reservists. I mean, are people talking about this? Are they talking about Pete Hegseth? And have they thought about maybe even approaching President-elect Trump if they have issues with him?
Yeah, I can't speak to any grassroots efforts regarding approaching the president-elect, but there certainly are conversations about his qualifications. There have been a lot of efforts regarding accountability, regarding issues like creating toxic environments, and there are a lot of concerns that doing this would create a continued environment of hostility towards service members.
Okay, Andrea Goldstein, Hogan Gidley, Frank Figluzzi, we thank you so much for joining us tonight. And in California, Governor Gavin Newsom now spearheading efforts to what he calls Trump-proof the state lawmakers, holding a special session today to discuss protecting California's progressive policies from attacks by the Trump administration, including a $25 million legal fund that's going to focus on reproductive rights and environmental causes. I want to bring in veteran political reporter Conan Nolan from NBC News Los Angeles for more. Conan, thanks for joining Top Story tonight. Talk to us, to our viewers, about what this special session is all about.
Well, keep in mind, Gavin Newsom, in the first Trump term, represented the resistance. There were 120 different lawsuits against the Trump administration the first 4 years on all sorts of things, from immigration to the environment. And now this is part two. The Attorney General today saying he accepts the $25 million. He believes it'll cost more than that. They're hiring staff because they believe they'll be going to court a lot on elements such as California's law, which the state says we're going to get rid of fossil fuel engines, cars being sold in 2035. That's something the federal government and the Trump administration says they are going to do everything they can to overturn. That's just one case where the state is trying to gear up for some serious litigation.
Let's talk about Governor Gavin Newsom, right? Because he has a moment now where he's still in charge of the biggest state in the country. California by itself would be one of the biggest countries as well. It's so massive, but with its economy. I do want to ask you, what role do you think he takes now in leadership within the Democratic Party as they look for a North Star and already start to talk about who is qualified to maybe sort of be the voice of the Democratic Party going over the next 4 years?
You know, Tom, I always thought that Gavin Newsom, even during the Biden administration, was running to be the face of the new Democratic Party. Once the octogenarian president and some of the other older members of the party moved on, Gavin Newsom wanted to be the guy who you thought of when it came to the resistance during the first Trump term. And so, there was a political scientist at USC who said the election was really bad for Governor Gavin Newsom, but really great for potential presidential candidate Gavin Newsom. All of a sudden, he has resonance now, and we expect him to, again, seek the mantle of being the person, the Democrat taking charge for the party going forward. I have to tell you, though, I think a lot of people will ask themselves, does the Democratic Party want to go to another Californian in 4 years to be their nominee for the White House? Good question. But Mr. Newsom, I think, sees that the next 2 years is an opportunity for him to reassert himself as the leader of the Democratic Party, the next generation, if you will.
Conan Nolan, a legendary reporter from Los Angeles. Conan, we thank you so much for joining Top Story tonight. All right, we want to head overseas now to the Middle East, where there's word tonight on the fate of 2 American hostages held in Gaza as another conflict, this one in Syria, escalates. Syrian rebels reigniting a civil war and seizing Aleppo, the country's second largest city. Matt Bradley has the late details.
Tonight, the fate of 2 young American-Israeli hostages coming into focus. Israel's military announced today that Omer Nutra, a 21-year-old IDF soldier from New York, was killed in the Hamas terror attacks on October 7th. For more than 400 days, his family thought he was still alive. His mother at a rally for hostages yesterday before word of his death.
We pray that this time miracles should happen, and they should happen really quickly.
Along with that news, word another American hostage is still alive. Appearing in a Hamas propaganda video on Saturday, Idan's mother appealing to Israel's prime minister and president for a hostage deal. While in Gaza, U.S.-based charity World Central Kitchen pausing its operations after 3 of its local staff members were killed in an Israeli airstrike. Israel said one of the 3 had participated in the October 7 terrorism, but the organization said it has no knowledge of any of the staff in the targeted vehicle having participated in that day's attacks. Meanwhile, war in the Middle East appears to be spreading. Syrian rebels launched their first major offensive against the regime of Bashar al-Assad in nearly 5 years. The regime and its Russian backers answering, with more than 400 airstrikes in the cities of Aleppo and Idlib, according to a UK-based human rights group.
Thousands of people, if you can say now, fleeing their homes. The situation is getting worse and worse as we are talking now.
The big question now is whether the regime of Bashar al-Assad will mobilize to defend itself or whether the rebels will keep winning territory. Tom?
Okay, Matt Bradley. Still ahead tonight, the closing arguments underway in the Daniel Penny case. The trial for the former Marine accused in the chokehold death of a subway performer could soon head to the jury. How both sides made their final case. Plus, this just in, a woman who went missing during a flight connection in Los Angeles, reportedly spotted crossing the border into Mexico. What we've just learned. And the dramatic ski race crash involving Olympic gold medalist Michaela Schifrin. Could this put her career in jeopardy? Stay with us. We We are back now with the latest in a case that sparked debate in New York and nationwide. Attorneys made their closing arguments today in the trial of Daniel Penny, the former Marine charged in the chokehold death of Subway performer Jordan Neely. The debate around whether Penny, who is 26, protected other Subway riders who feared Neely was on the verge of violence, or if Penny was acting like a vigilante and killed a man who may have needed help. Rahema Ellis has been following this case closely, and she joins Top Story tonight. So, Rahema, walk us through the closing arguments and what's happened so far.
Let me tell you off the top that the defense started closing arguments today. The prosecution went last. They haven't finished. They're going to continue tomorrow before this case goes to the jury. But for the defense part, let me read some of what they said to the jurors today. The defense attorney said to the jurors, I want you to imagine that you were on that train that day when Jordan Neely walked in, and, quote, a violent, desperate Jordan Neely entered the train filled with, and these are her words, his words, I should say, filled with rage and not afraid of any consequences, causing passengers, in the defense attorney's words, to be frozen with fear before Daniel Penny acted to save those people's lives. The defense also countered the prosecution's argument that it was the chokehold that caused the death. They presented a witness that said that wasn't it, that Jordan Neely died from medical circumstances, including a genetic condition and marijuana that had been found in his system. The prosecution now, it had its turn this afternoon. And it's interesting how the prosecution presented it, saying, in fact, that no one had to die that day. They said that Daniel Penny was, quote, an honorable veteran and a young man, and a nice young man, they said, but he used too much force for too long and was reckless with Neely's life because he didn't recognize his humanity.
You know, I want to show one of the pieces of evidence shown to jurors. It was body cam video from police, and these are eyewitnesses who were on the subway train. Here's what they told police.
The whole train was freaked out. He was either going to, like, pull a gun and knife or, like... said, I'm willing to die. I'm willing to die. You know, I'm willing to get killed.
The whole train was freaked out, saying that Neely said, I'm willing to die. I'm willing to die. You've been following this case. Do we have a sense of what the jury's going to think?
No, I don't think we do, because both the prosecution and the defense presented witnesses on the prosecution side where some said, you ride the subway in New York, you're going to hear sounds like this. And they didn't take it to mean that it was as serious as Daniel Penny presented it, and therefore required him to put this person, Jordan Neely, in a chokehold. But as you just heard, there were witnesses on that train who said they were definitely afraid for their lives.
And part of this case, right, because we know the Manhattan DA was in court today for some of these closing arguments, Alvin Bragg. The defense has said that this was politics at play, that because there were reports in the newspapers, because there were protests, that's the reason why they brought charges. That's been part of this court case as well, correct?
Absolutely. There are some who said that this never should have been brought. This man did not go into the subway that day, meaning Daniel Penny, intending to kill anyone. But that's why the charges are manslaughter and reckless endangerment of life. If he's found guilty by these jurors of 12, 7 women, 5 men, he could face up to 15 years in prison.
Okay, we will wait for that verdict. Rahema Ellis, we thank you for that. All right, we are back now with Top Stories news feed and an update in the case of a missing woman in Los Angeles. Law enforcement sources telling NBC News Los Angeles that video shows Hannah Kobayashi crossing the border into Mexico about a day or two after her family lost contact with her. The sources say so far there is no evidence of foul play. Kobayashi was reported missing after she was traveling from Hawaii to New York and missed her connecting flight in Los Angeles. And over the weekend, 6 people somehow survived their home blowing up in the middle of the night. New images show first responders working to pull those 6 survivors from under the debris. They were there for more than 3 hours. Right now, they are all in the hospital, 3 of them in critical condition. 2 pets were also safely rescued. From this footage, you can see the residents nearly flattened. No word yet on what caused that explosion. If you went to the movies, the lines were long this holiday weekend. In fact, they were the longest ever. The release of 3 major blockbusters, Moana 2, Gladiator 2, and Wicked, shattering the Thanksgiving holiday box office record, raking in more than $400 million in ticket sales, surpassing the previous record set in 2018. Moana 2 led the charge, crossing over $200 million since its premiere just last week. Finally tonight, we take you back to Lahaina just in time for the holidays. More than a year after that devastating wildfire ripped through that town, one family now returning to the place they call home. Here's Morgan Chesky.
On an island where heritage runs deep, the town of Lahaina is out to prove a painful past does not define its future.
Everything was perfect.
Which is why for the Ahi family of 4,
We got a bathroom with a crying baby.
this home tour is historic.
And then we've got 3 bedrooms right now.
A 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom miracle rising from the ashes after one of Maui's darkest days.
You don't appreciate it until you lose it, you know.
We worked really, really hard for that house. And it's hard to see your hard work gone.
Mau and Ariel Ahi's dream home, one of the more than 2,000 lost to a fire, forcing many to leave for good, as Lahaina figured out how to reclaim their paradise.
There's so many people that need help that I'm just trying to do what I can.
Derek Montalvo helping the Ahis fast-track building on a bigger, better home.
I can't believe it. We're just grateful and so blessed.
Lahaina's very first home back, receiving a Hawaiian blessing all its own, with more than 100 other homes following their lead.
We look at this home as like a hokupa'a, as a North Star.
I just want the kids to experience what I grew up with, the ocean, the rivers, you know, family. This is the home.
Morgan Chesky, NBC News.
Okay, that does it for us tonight. Thanks so much for watching Top Story. I'm Tom Llamas in New York. Stay right there. More news on the way.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.